Hello, everyone. As you know, my name is Farzana Chohan. Today, I have an honor and a privilege to have a conversation with Joseph Kwan. I was introduced to him through a mutual friend, architect Shahab Ghani. Joseph Kwan is a director of Universal Design Associates, Hong Kong. He has served as the global chair of the Rehabilitation International Commission on Technology and Accessibility, ICTA. He is an experienced architect and access consultant with involvement in access to the built environment. He has practiced architecture in Australia, United Kingdom, and France, and was the director of an access advisory service in Hong Kong from 1987 to 2005. He founded the practice UDA Consultant Limited, a specialist consultancy on universal design and accessibility. So, yes, I understand that I have said a mouthful of phrases which are not typically associated with an architect. So that is why I said it is my honor and my privilege to have Joseph here and talk about what it means to be providing accessibility as an architect and equity by architecture.
Thank you, Dr. Farzana, for the invitation to have our discussions. I'm really delighted that now we have someone like yourself who are recognizing that architecture is so broad, it's multifaceted, and that the fact that there are people out there doing architecture, practicing architecture, who may not be actually building, and designing like so-called architecture that we know. We're the groups on the fringe, which are equally important, just like academics. I'm one of those persons, probably like yourself, who went into mainstream architecture, but we end up doing these things which are multifaceted in a way that it's more human related. For me in particular, it's what we call rehabilitation, which are working with people with disabilities. That's my background now for the last 30 years, since I got out of sort of built architectural firm or building buildings. So I got into this area of designing and working with people with disabilities, which is a huge group in a way. I think the WHO report says there are something like 15% of the people in the world has some sort of disability. And that's almost like 1 billion people. This is the group I was always interested in working with and for. Fortunate enough to be involved in ICTA, first of all, the International Commission on Technology Accessibility. This is a commission of Rehabilitation International, which is a global organization. And I'm happy to be involved in learning with the few of us. There are not many of us. I think I can still probably count those so-called full-time accessibility consultants and experts in this world, maybe no more than 20. This is the group you're talking about now. There are a few of us working inclusively in accessibility. That's my ICTA background. Eventually, I was the global chairman for 10 years for that, and then I was elected the vice president of Asia Pacific for RI, for Rehabilitation International. And my friend just reminded me, yes, you are responsible for a majority of people with disabilities in the world, because majority of the population is in China and in India, for instance.
You said you started somewhere around in 80s after graduating from architecture. And when you have graduated as an architect, the expectation is that you will go and become a signature architect and will serve the clients who have deep pockets. So what made you go into it? How that human relatedness came to you?
When I was doing in architecture in Australia, when I was doing my final year thesis, I was sort of beginning to be exposed, if you like, to this human aspect. So there are a lot of books at that time relating to human behavior, the human psychology aspect, my interest in that area. So my undergraduate thesis was actually called Space and Psychology. It's very important in architecture. I think we should be building that relates to people. And I thought that was an area that I wanted to deal with, the people actually sitting in the desk. How do they feel sitting in an office, for instance? That environment, does that make them feel better? Does it make them feel good? That's what environmental psychology is all about. So eventually I got involved in working with people with disability, and I started redesigning a few little homes for them. And that's why I got my interest into the human aspect of things.
And this reminds me of my own work in my final year design thesis. I did a research and design on leprosy center, and it was still a highly stigmatized disease. And when I look back, I think that thing which I learned through that process of looking at people impacted by leprosy and how important it is that you listen to your users and design something for them. They still need a human connectedness to the nature and environment, which helps in fighting the infection like leprosy. That human relatedness you talk about in built environment is important. My next point of discussion to you is, how come architecture has become more synonymous with designing buildings and projects for people who have deep pockets? How it is possible that it has earned a reputation of being an elite profession for elites?
I think the young ones see that as, what is architecture? It's building these beautiful buildings, getting the names printed, getting their works published. And that is probably, it's always been the mainstream of architecture. But I believe probably now in the last 20 years or so, it's focusing more on other aspects, like what we're talking about now, the more human aspects and what are we here to do, and I think it's good to see that even within Hong Kong, which is a very, it's like New York City, it's very cutthroat in the way that everyone wants to build buildings, but get a project and put their name to it. Young people, which is a very competitive and highly capitalistic place, are more focusing themselves on what we're talking about. They're going out and doing volunteer work. They're happy with going building volunteer little huts and shacks in Cambodia for the poor and the underprivileged. So I think that's coming. And I think it's probably, hopefully, that we, over the last 20 years have built up a foundation anyway for them to come on and say, okay, this is what architecture can be. Architecture must be for humans at first, and not for the clients of a corporation, of shareholders. We need to be there, and hopefully we can encourage the younger generation to think and develop more of this, more depth into the architecture. I think
how we can kind of have more inspiration, motivation for architecture as a profession to go in that direction.
Yeah, I think it's probably, once again, it goes right back to architecture school, right? The concept of architecture. I think we need to go right back to the basic of teaching on social responsibility. Maybe this could be taught in school as well, as long as, in addition to what we normally learn in architecture, traditionally in designing, in structure, in materials, and interiors, apart from building buildings, we have the other dimension of why do we build things? And who for and for what purpose?
I come from a school, and I don't know if you have ever heard of a name of Professor Kausar Bashir Ahmed. He was the dean of a school of architecture where I studied my undergraduate degree. And he always said, we are social architects. You can design fabulous buildings, but it will just be between you and your client and their users. That's where that school of architecture have played a critical role in some of us who graduated from there and now are working in different areas directly and indirectly related to architecture. I think my motivation in healthcare architecture came from that.
People think, oh, my child goes an architect, he or she should be building the next grand opera house or the next parliament house for your country or for the city, etc. And that's probably, I hope that conception is, I believe it is breaking down a bit. Some people are specializing in building hotels, some people are specializing in your area, where healthcare, we're equally important. And I think, we're social architects in a way. Some people are doing housing, for instance, and you can have high-rise, very fancy apartment blocks in Trump Tower in New York City, for instance, and yet you can build equally good social housing in Karachi or in Islamabad. Committees like the Arc-Asia and the UIA, International Union of Architects, we are promoting this area of social architecture and architecture for children, architecture for not for the 1% of the rich, but for the masses.
How architects and architectural bodies can strive to be part of the community citizenship?
We need to look at poverty alleviation, education, and certainly that could be our role. Through that, healthcare, which means we have to build better hospitals. If we talk about poverty, what is that? We give them employment. If we talk about education, we have to build better schools, not just throw them in. And you kids, you learn that there's a room for you, there's desks, there's beyond that, the physical spaces. I think SDG is a good example of, the way we should be heading towards more inclusive of other aspects of society. And I think we're moving towards that. I think the fact that we have an SDG which focus those things, it's a matter of getting them related. It's a matter of getting architects learning, hey, we just don't work in this little box. We need to work in the big box. Otherwise, we're going to be dinosaurs. It's like, we're going to be left behind. You're only building. No longer we have rich clients. Even the clients themselves are more, right? They
are more social responsibility oriented.
Absolutely. They're looking exactly what do you call it? Corporate social responsibility, CSR.
Yes.
They don't want to just certain things. They want no profit making. It's obviously important, but they go for CSR. I think that's what we need to go for. Corporate social responsibility for companies. And how do we as an architect satisfy the CSR in building something which is equally good for them? Yes.
Towards the end of this discussion, my question, what I think about is that how we can more proactively move forward in creating this equity, both internally in architecture and externally, and equity by architecture. What are your thoughts on that?
I sort of, the position that you and I are in are fortunate enough that hopefully, I believe now we can look at a top-down approach. I think, you and I are in a position where we know the right people who may be able to influence you yourself, maybe from your end, speak to your people from your institute, IAP, from the top down. And I'm sure your people are very much into it already, and hopefully that will filter down to the architecture school, to the student, to the community, to the society, where the purpose of the architects needs to be redefined. My final words, be more inclusive. We need to be diversified. We need to include people. And the last word is for equity, equality. That's why we have the United Nations Convention of Rights of People with Disabilities. I think this is different levels we work at, and a professional level and my level, I'm happy to say, from the rehab side and your side, I'm sure you have identified people that you can, who can work equally well with you in promoting our work beyond just building, brick and mortar and glass blocks, etc.
Very well said. Equity is so important, and having equity in profession and through the experiences of people like yourself, when they will work collaboratively with each other, all these professional bodies, it will create more equity within architecture and equity by architecture. Thank you, Joseph, for your thoughts and your points to reflect upon. And these are words of wisdom which we all can take and move forward with it. So thank you so much for your time from Australia.
Thank you very much. And all the best for your study. Thank you very much for introducing this particular topic, that architecture is very diverse. And I think there are certain elements that architects like ourselves has a very important role into making the society a better place for everyone to live in. So congratulations, all the best, and I look forward to hearing your results from your research.
Thank you.